In 1989, Ford was the undisputed king of the world. The Ford Escort wasn't just a car. It was a default setting for millions of families across America and Europe. It was the best-selling nameplate on the planet, a vehicle so dominant that Ford executives believed it was unkillable. But behind the glass walls of Detroit and Dagenham, a group of accountants was about to commit corporate suicide. They believed they could strip the soul out of the car, replace it with cheap plastic and ancient engines, and that the public simply wouldn't notice. They were wrong. This is the story of how a $1 billion investment turned into the biggest punchline of 1990, and how Ford accidentally handed the keys of the automotive kingdom to Japan. To understand the scale of this disaster, you have to realize that Ford spent over $1 billion developing the 1990 Escort, known internally as the CE-14 project. In 1990 money, that was a staggering fortune. The goal was to create a world car that would dominate the next decade. But while Ford was spending billions, they weren't spending it on engineering excellence. They were spending it on complexity and bureaucracy. When the car finally hit the showrooms in September 1990, the motoring press didn't just give it a bad review. They were offended. One famous journalist described the car's handling as being like a jelly on a plate. Ford had taken a decade of market leadership and flushed it away in a single afternoon. The primary reason for the crumble was a poison known as cost-cutting. Ford's leadership decided that since the Escort name was so famous, the car didn't actually need to be good to sell. They equipped the 1990 model with a simplified, budget suspension system that felt numb and disconnected from the road. While competitors like the Volkswagen Golf were becoming drivers' cars, the Escort felt like a motorized shopping cart. To make matters worse, they kept the aging CVH engine, a power plant that was already vibrating its way out of style in the 80s. It was loud, unrefined, and sounded like a bag of nails being shaken in a tin can. In an era where smoothness was the new luxury, Ford had delivered a dinosaur. But the real betrayal was happening inside the cabin. The 1990 Escort interior became the gold standard for bleak. It was a sea of scratchy, hard, gray plastic that felt cheaper than the model it replaced. It was an environment designed by spreadsheets, not by human beings. At the exact same moment Ford was releasing this uninspired gray box, Japanese manufacturers like Honda and Toyota were perfecting the Civic and the Corolla. The Japanese weren't cutting corners. They were over-engineering. While Ford relied on brand inertia to keep people buying, customers realized they could get a Japanese car that was faster, quieter, and infinitely more reliable for the same price. The 1990 Escort didn't just lose sales, it lost the public's trust. The aftermath was a brutal lesson in market reality. Within months, Ford market share began to bleed out. They were forced to spend millions more on emergency facelifts and engineering fixes just to make the car tolerable, but the damage was done. The Escort, once the pride of the Ford fleet, had become a symbol of corporate arrogance. It proved that in the car world, you're only as good as your last model, and no nameplate is big enough to survive a billion-dollar lack of effort. Looking back from 2026, we see this as the turning point. The moment the big three realized that good enough was no longer enough to stop the world from moving on. Tell me in the comments, did you or your family own a 1990s Escort? Was it as bad as the critics said? If you love these deep dives into corporate failures, hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, and I'll see you in the next one.